Happy Sunday, everybody. We're all having a good week as we come here to the end of week 2 of Aetherdrift. And if you're competing in the Arena Open, I wish you luck. May you get your $2,000. And we've got 9 decks to cover today, and I've also been working on a mono blue tempo build for the YouTube members. So I just wanted to say thank you to those who have remained YouTube members, all 5 of you. I appreciate the support. I will be putting up weekly polls about which brews you would like to see. All of my brews are also available on Moxfield if I don't showcase all of them, right? So if you want to see like how I approached mono white cats or whatever, right? Then we try to do I'm trying to do kind of off meta picks, like improving decks that aren't quite in the high enough tier, and see if we can get them to be a more viable strategy, that sort of thing. But on Sundays, what I like to do is cover my meta breakers, which are off meta picks. Just means that they weren't in the top 8 that I talked about on the previous Monday, and they all have been successfully piloted to Mythic with at least a 50% win rate, or 60% win rate, and 50 matches. So let's get started. It's a fun little way to just kind of give shout outs to people who've had good climbs. And we came to the end of the season in February, so a lot of these are kind of late season. And then we'll talk about the 9th deck is the first deck to hit Mythic on the tracker. So first up here, we've got Esper Self-Bounce. It's a very popular deck. You'll bump into it a lot. So my best of 1 meta review is not based off of popularity, it's based off of win rate, which can cause some problems. But the nice thing about meta breakers is that I can kind of fill in the gaps this way, right? So this one was Esper Self-Bounce by Biro Blaze, went 50 and 26 for a 66% win rate. And we see a couple of things that there's been a change to this archetype a little bit, to lean a little bit more heavily into the new like the artifact Grim Bauble has been commonly seen in the lists. Sheltered by Ghosts is usually included as well. Also the 4 copies of the Momentum Breaker. But if you're going to lean so heavily into the black, then you're going to kind of shift things around a little bit, right? This one's also not running Entity Tracker, which I do commonly see in this build, and is running the 4 copies of the Stormchaser's Talent. There's actually been a little bit of a move away from running a full playset of the Stormchaser's Talent, just because the loop of getting this town ain't big enough, and Stormchaser's Talent works better in a slower meta than it does in the fast-paced meta of best of 1. So keep that in mind if you're looking at like best of 3 lists. They're not necessarily comparable to best of 1. You might have better luck tweaking this to be a little bit more geared towards best of 1 by bringing in the 4 copies of Sheltered by Ghosts, Grim Bauble, and Momentum Breaker. That being said, this does look like a best of 3 list that they just pulled from a tournament, so that's probably why it's more geared towards that side of the build. And then we see the Spiteful Hex Mage. This is included sometimes, not always. No More Lies is usually a sideboard card in best of 3 that you bring in when you're up against something like Domain, where you have like sweepers that you want to block. Pretty good at blocking Temporary Lockdown too. And then Kaido, running 3 copies here. Usually in best of 1 you run less Kaido because it's worse off in the aggro matchup. So you could bring those down. And then running the full playset of the Nowhere to Run, which we've also seen kind of people moving away from this. It's really good for answering the Sheltered by Ghosts in Boros Auras, but we've seen a decline in that as well. And then we have the 1 copy of Gix's Command, which again is more commonly seen as a sideboard option in best of 3. So if you want to give a best of 3 run on the best of 3 list a run on the ladder, and then check out this list by Biro Blaze. And again, these are not picked in any particular order. They're just kind of picked throughout the week, looking at the people who have hit Mythic on the Untapped tracker. So next up here is Mono White Lifegain by Wizard Lizard Uwu. It went 46 and 30 for a 61% win rate. And we can see that they dropped 4 planes to bring in the 4 Caves of Kolios. The Painland allows you to give your Essence Channeler the flying and vigilance on your turn, and so sometimes it's included. Most popular build doesn't usually include it. This one's also dropping 3 copies of the Knight Errant of Eos, as well as all of the copies of the Linden, the Steadfast Queen, which is the triple pip white card, and also dropping a single copy of the Leyline of Hope instead of running a full playset to bring in Sarah Paragon. And we've seen some Sarah Paragon lists that run like Demolition Field and things like that in the more of the mono white control build, where you can bring back like your carrot cakes and that sort of thing. So I don't usually see this one included in this, but you've got the, a good chunk of your deck is within that range to bring back with the Sarah Paragon, so it can give you a little bit late game resources. And then this one's running 2 copies of the Sanguine Evangelist, and that one's one that we don't usually see in the mono white Lifegain build. It is 2 bodies though, so it does trigger the double Lifegain off of like the Hinterland Sanctifier ETB. But really the reason I think they're running this is because they're bringing in 2 copies of the Enduring Innocence. This one I do see a little bit more commonly included even without these, just because a lot of your small bodies draw you cards and it gives you a little bit of additional resources. So Knight Errant of Eos is also a card draw, so it's kind of like they're leaning towards the Enduring Innocence for the card draw instead of the Knight Errant of Eos. And then we've got 2 copies of the Exemplar of Light. This one, I've seen it included in some builds, left out in others. This also giving you some additional card draw instead of the Knight Errant of Eos. So kind of take your pick. And the third one that I'd like to give a brief shout out to is Mardu Aggro. And this is not necessarily much of a meta breaker. I usually get to talk about Mardu Aggro every week in the best of 1 if I include it from Bronze to Mythic. Since I changed it to Diamond and above, we didn't talk about Mardu Aggro last week, so I just want to make sure that it's on your radar. This one was by Ariel Ongus and went 122 and 66 for a 65% win rate into Mythic. And there's no changes to this from the most popular build. This is the one that is very similar to what we've covered week in and week out. Fourth up is Boros Mice by Dulcet, and I believe that we'll actually talk about Boros Mice in the tomorrow's Best of 1 meta review. We didn't cover it last week because it's a little bit less of a popular option, but I do believe it will make it into the top 8, at least with what I was seeing today. So this one was by Dulcet, went 39 and 17 for a 70% win rate. And if we compare this one to the most common build that I see, we've dropped 2 Restless Bivouacs, 2 Plains, and brought in the Verge lands that we got in Aetherdrift. I think this is a pretty good change. And then we dropped the 1 copy of Screaming Nemesis to run an additional Shard Mage's Rescue. And so sometimes you include one Screaming Nemesis because it can be really good on the draw, and especially against mono red strategies where they have damage-based removal, makes the Screaming Nemesis a really, like, pretty much always a 2-for-1. And yeah, so then that's a way to kind of improve the mirror match and the mono red match on the draw. But the second copy, the Shard Mage's Rescue, helps you save your creatures, especially since we're seeing less of that nowhere to run in Esper Bounce. Next up is Mono Red Goblins by Alt Glitter 22. Went 93 and 58 for a 62% win rate. And we're still waiting for Goblins to kind of take its final form, if you will. And so this one is not running the 4 copies of the Amonkhet Raceway. The most popular build is running fully into the Amonkhet Raceway, but it's also running Impact Trimmers, which allows you to kind of ping without having to attack off of the ETBs off of Krenko. And it's also running the Draconauts Engineer, which allows you to give your creatures haste for 1 red, and as well as create the 4/4 dragon for 4. This one's also not running the Grease Wrench Goblin, which is the 2/1 for 1 that can exhaust to discard cards, which can help if you're flooding out. So options to consider there. And this one is instead running an additional Cavern of Souls, bringing in the 4th copy of the Fanatical Firebrand, and then running the 4 copies of the Restless Lackey. This one was what we saw before Aetherdrift in the Mono Goblins build, and so I think it's just kind of left over from that, since this version is also running the 3 copies of Breaches, as well as the 3 copies of Squee. So kind of an older build on Mono Red Goblins than what I think Aetherdrift is taking it. So if you are thinking about crafting this, I'd still hold off on this archetype for a little bit, because I think the final version is... It's tough to say whether or not the Impact Tremors build is actually going to make it. It's because they have different matchups, right? The more of the go wide, it punishes the mono black single point interaction, whereas like Breaches can have a faster clock of just swinging into your opponent. So we'll see where it finally lands. All right, and we also have an Azorius Control list, made it into Mythic with a 37 and 18 for a 67% win rate. This one was by L4 K6. And this is an older version of Azorius Control as well, not running a lot of the different... It's going in a different direction than what we're seeing in the most popular build. So this one is bringing, it still has cards like Spellgyre and Farsight Ritual, only 3 copies of Jace instead of 4, running 1 Day of Judgment instead of 3, running 2 Temporary Lockdowns instead of 3, running the blast, or not running the blast zones, which can help out against the Goblin decks and the Boros Convoke deck and mono red to an extent. Not running Change the Equation, and not running Bezas, and also not running the Overlord of the Mistmoors. So the Overlord and the Mistmoors and the Beza, I think, it's got some interesting synergies where you're just going wide a little bit differently. And then as far as the new cards that really have breathed interest into Azorius Control, this one's not running Stock Up, which I think is going to become kind of a main, because it's such a good divination that I think it's advantaged over cards like the Farsight Ritual and the Spellgyre. So I just drop those 4 and bring in the 4 copies of the Stock Up. And then Ride's End is seeing a lot of play, and I think it's just going to be better than Not on My Watch, because it's essentially the same, except where it's tapped creature, so I guess it gets punished a little bit against Vigilance, but for 5, then you can use it as just hard removal. So we're seeing seeing Ride's End being brought into more of the builds. And yeah, so as far as what this is bringing in, that I guess the other one is not, is the full playset of 3 Steps Ahead. This one allows you to copy and draw. It's a pretty common inclusion for a counterspell. Also bringing in the 3 copies of the Elspeth Smite helps out against mono red, and bringing in the 3rd copy of the No More Lies. Soul Partition is a good way to get rid of non-land permanents, so if they have a problematic enchantment like the Unholy Annex. Kutzel's Flanker is in here for some graveyard hate. We've got 1 copy of the Authority of the Consuls to help out against the aggro haste, and then we've also got 1 copy of Ghost Vacuum to help out against the 4-color Azorius Omniscience deck, as well as the 4-color Reanimator strategy. And then we've got the additional copy of Sunfall, which is very common in the old build. Not on My Watch, I already mentioned, is kind of like the Ride's End. And then the 2 copies of Spellgyre. Really, the Farsight Ritual and the Spellgyre was trying to replace the Memory Deluge that we lost in rotation. So again, I think this is another one that, like, here you go. It's an older build. It was successfully piloted to Mythic. It's a good deck, right? But I do think that we're going to see some changes coming to this archetype that take it in a little bit of a different direction. All right, and this is also just something that I'm playing around with, is I'm trying to incorporate more of the popular builds that you will see, because one of the things that's nice about a meta review is that what the the most common build of that deck is running, which has been kind of missing going off of the winning, how well the deck is performing instead of based off of popularity. So in doing this, by comparing it to the most popular builds, I hope it gives you an idea, covers all the bases is the idea. So let me know if you like it. So Dimir Control by Victor Video went 46 and 24 for a 66% win rate. And this one, I've bumped into it a fair amount, especially in the upper Diamond and Mythic ranks, because the River Churn Monument 1-turn kill is pretty fun, right? So this is a card that we got in Aetherdrift, definitely seeing a lot of play and a lot of exploration. The most popular build that I've seen is pairing the River Churn Monument with the Teresian Mindbreaker, which is the card for 1 triple blue that you can unearth that mills half of your opponent's library. Because with doing that and then the River Churn Monument, you mill their entire deck with 2 cards. Not necessarily the best build, though, we shall see. So this one's also not running Liliana, which I think is a pretty common inclusion to attack your opponent's resources at hand. I've also seen Shieldred, the True Scriptures, being explored in this archetype as another way to kind of attack your opponent's resources and just win through value. The 4th copy of Jace I would include, since you are just trying to mill them out. I find Jace is a particularly nice tool for that. And then only 2 cut down and only 2 duress is also a direction that I would probably run the 3 duress and the 3 cut down. And again, that's the more popular build is going that direction. This is also not running Refute, which is a pretty nice cancel that gives you the card filtering, gives you the loot. So Refute might be a good one to explore. So what this list is doing differently, though, is bringing in more Planeswalker hate with the Shieldred's Edict, and bringing in the old classic Deduce, so that if they are playing around your counter spells, then you can play the Deduce. The problem with this one is, like, it depends on the matchup. If your opponent is playing more of a mid-range strategy, which is less common in best of 1, then they're more likely to try to play around your counter spells because they can afford to. Whereas if they're playing something like Mono Red Aggro, they're not really going to play around your counterspells. They're just going to try to hit you fast and hard and kill you, right? So Deduce works worse off in the aggro matchups in best of 1, in my opinion, than something like the artifact, the Maze Mind Tome, right? So, but yeah, the upside to this is that if you have mana up, you can do the Deduce, gives you 2 cards in 1. It's pretty nice. We've also got the Phantom Interference, this classic counterspell, and then we've got the Oil Deep Gearhulk. And remember that you can target yourself with this. So if your opponent is hellbent, you can use it for card filtering in your own hand. But otherwise, you're just using this to hate on your opponent's hand. And then we've also got the 3 copies of Go for the Throat for, again, some more targeted removal and control that Victor took it this direction. And then same with Anoint with Affliction, and and then the 3 Steps Ahead. So 3 Steps Ahead, I think, has seen a little bit less play because of not being able to get to 5 mana, where it really shines to be able to do the counterspell and draw the 2 cards, or 6 mana to copy something of yours. But with the control kind of build, you'll have more mana to go further into the 3 Steps Ahead if you're deciding to run more single point interaction like Victor is doing. So I'm not trying to say that this is a bad build. I'm just trying to, if you're new to the archetype, try to give you as much information as possible. So, yeah, and then I guess there's a slight tweak to the lands with the Undercity Sewers being run to give you some Surveil, which gives you some card selection, more commonly seen in cards that are in decks that care more about your graveyard, personally. Okay, and we've got Mono Black Discard by Kirill. Oh man, that's a tough one. Kirillka went 33 and 19 for 63%. And so this is like an amalgamation of Mono Black Discard with Mono Black Midrange. And the Mono Black Discard decks, if you have Bandit's talent in there, I'm going to call it a Mono Black Discard deck, regardless of what else you're doing. But we've got like Liliana, we've got Duress to attack the hand. But then we also have the demon synergies of Archfiend of the Dross, Bloodletter of Aclazotz, Soulstone Sanctuary for the Unholy Annex. So the more popular build of Mono Black Discard, not necessarily the better build, right? Because Mono Black Midrange has performed better than the discard strategies. But that one is usually running a full playset of the Bandit's talent, usually running a full playset of the Cut Down for against Mono Red, usually is running 1 less Liliana of the Veil, and going for less of the bringing in more single point interaction with the Go for the Throats. Sorry, I'm having a hard time this morning. It's also running Shieldred the Apocalypse. So part of the discard strategy is you attack their hand really heavily, and then you play Shieldred the Apocalypse, which means that if they have the counter to the discard strategy, which is card draw, you're then punishing them with the Shieldred the Apocalypse. Ruthless Negotiation is another way to attack your opponent's hand twice and is commonly included, but is not seen in this build. And then the 3 copies of the Thought Stalker Warlock is still seeing a lot of play, where you can attack your opponent's hand through the creature as well. And then, so yeah, I did misspeak. The discard strategy is usually running 3 copies of Liliana. My apologies. And not one less. And then Rankle's Prank is another one that we see in this archetype. So Rankle's Prank is one that can attack your opponent's hand, but also their life total, and works pretty well with like how small game this becomes when you're attacking everybody's resources. And then 1 copy of Tiny Bones the Pickpocket is typically included as well, as just a way to play the busted permanents that you're making them discard from their graveyard. So it kind of gives you a little bit, as well as just having a Death Toucher can block reasonably well if they do get through one of their threats through your many answers. So what this deck is doing, though, differently is using Duress to attack the opponent's hand, which I like. We'll see if the Intimidation campaign makes it into this build too, because that can attack creatures instead of instead of non-creatures. Should at least be explored, I think. The 4 copies of the Unholy Annex, as I mentioned, are not usually included in the discard strategy, and is kind of what changes the difference between discard and mono black midrange. So the Unholy Annex, just leaning more into that strategy. We've got the Anoint with Affliction for exile, and instead of the Go for the Throats. And we've got the Momentum Breaker, and I like this one because it's an edict that if they don't have a creature, then attacks their hand. So I think this one fits relatively well into the discard strategy. And then, like I mentioned, we've got the Demons, the Archfiend of the Dross, the Bloodletter Backlazats, the Soulstone Sanctuary. And then we're running 2 copies of the Shoot the Sheriff, which again, I think I like the Go for the Throats more, but I guess there's like the Gear Hulks now that are coming in from Aetherdrift, where you have a little bit more artifact creatures. My preference has been for the Go for the Throats. And then we've got 1 copy of Deadly Cover-Up. And what's the nice thing about Deadly Cover-Up is that it's a nice answer. It's a nice, clean answer to Azorius Omniscience, right? If you exile the Omniscience from their graveyard and all of their copies in their deck, the deck doesn't do anything. So I like having the Deadly Cover-Up in black. Okay, and the last one is Mono Black Midrange by Dingo3456. This was the first person to hit Mythic. I believe it was Mythic number 7 on the tracker, and I think they hit it yesterday. 92 and 47. Sorry, 92 and 47 for a 66% win rate. And this one, man, my voice is dying. Sorry. And this one is also a pretty much the most typical build, right? The only thing that changes is that they're not running the Soulstone Sanctuary or the Mishra's Foundry. So the more popular build runs the Mishra's Foundries because of the cheap interaction with Liliana in the mirror match. Because you don't. It gives you more additional demon synergies to run the Soulstone Sanctuary, so some people prefer the Soulstone Sanctuary. But it also helps out against like the aggro matchups to have the cheaper activation of the Mishra's Foundry. So, again, thank you everybody for listening to my ramblings, and thank you to my YouTube members. If you enjoyed this content and you like this sort of analysis, and you want to help support me, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You also get, free deck techs with the community deck tech. You can ask me for sideboard guides and all that fun stuff, and you also get to be a part of the members only poll on which brew I'm going to be trying to do in my busy schedule. So we'll see. I'm just, trying to have fun, trying to geek out about Magic. So good luck with your RCQs, good luck climbing the ladder, and I will see you all tomorrow for the best of 1, best of 3 meta review. Take care.